In the heart of downtown Chicago, the Cook County Circuit Court did not always smell of justice. Mostly, it smelled of old floor wax, cheap coffee, and the suffocating scent of fear. To the casual tourist walking past the limestone facade, it was a monument to the law. But to those who found themselves guided through its metal detectors and handcuffs, it was a meat grinder. And sitting at the levers of that grinder was Judge Sterling Vance. Sterling Vance was a man constructed entirely of sharp angles and inherited arrogance. At 58 years old, his hair was a precisely sculpted helmet of silver. His suits came from custom tailors on Michigan Avenue, and his eyes possessed the flat, unblinking coldness of a predator that had never known what it felt like to be hunted. For over 2 decades, Vance had ruled Courtroom 402 like a sovereign fiefdom. He did not merely interpret the law, he weaponized it. To understand Sterling Vance, one had to understand his lineage. His father, Arthur Vance, had been a federal judge in the turbulent decades of the mid-20th century, a man known for his brutal sentencing of civil rights activists and labor organizers under the guise of maintaining public tranquility. Sterling did not just revere his father's legacy, he viewed himself as the biological heir to a specific racial and social hierarchy. In his private thoughts and among his inner circle at the exclusive Union League Club, Vance often lamented the decay of American urban topology. To him, the bench was not a place for rehabilitation. It was a frontline trench where he could systematically weed out what he called the cultural detritus that threatened the comfort of his peers. The morning docket on this particular rainy Tuesday was, as usual, a dreary parade of human misery. The air in the gallery was heavy with the dampness of wet coats and the low, anxious murmurs of families waiting for their lives to be torn apart. Vance sat high above them on his elevated mahogany bench, looking down through wire-rimmed spectacles with an expression of permanent, grandfatherly disgust. He dispatched cases with a rhythmic, assembly line efficiency that was terrifying to behold. "People versus Martinez," the court clerk announced, her voice flat with the boredom of repetition. "Possession of a controlled substance, misdemeanor." A young man, his hands trembling so violently they rattled the chain of his handcuffs, stood beside a young public defender who looked like she hadn't slept since the previous Thursday. "How do you plead, Mr. Martinez?" Vance asked, his voice a smooth radio baritone that carried an undercurrent of profound boredom. "No contest, Your Honor," the public defender whispered on behalf of her client. "We ask for leniency, given this is his first." "Leniency is a luxury earned by those who contribute to the tax base, Counselor," Vance interrupted, not even looking up from his digital docket. 18 months at Cook County Jail, suspended upon completion of 6 months of hard labor with the Department of Forestry, plus a $3,000 fine. Next, the heavy wooden gavel fell. Thud. To Vance, that sound was the heartbeat of civilization. It was the sound of order being hammered into a chaotic, unruly world. Behind him, the American flag and the state flag of Illinois hung in still, heavy folds, providing a patriotic backdrop to a theater of cruelty. Moving in perfect silent synchronicity with the judge were his 2 loyal satellites. Clayton Boyd, the chief prosecutor for the district, a slick, ambitious young man whose teeth were too white and whose ambition was too loud, and Mitchell, Big Mitch Kowalski, the towering bailiff whose leather duty belt creaked every time he shifted his massive weight. They were the cogs in Vance's well-oiled machine. They knew the unwritten rules. They knew who to crush, and more importantly, they knew who to protect. As the morning dragged on through shoplifting charges, domestic disputes, and minor traffic violations, Vance's impatience began to curdle into something sharper. He hated the rain. It made the commoners smell like wet dogs, and it ruined the view of the skyline from his chambers. He leaned back in his leather chair, waiting for the one case on the morning list that promised to satisfy his specific, cruel appetite. Docket 44,091, the clerk read. People versus Marcus Cross. The judge's brow furrowed slightly at the clerk's slip of the tongue, a faint shadow of annoyance crossing his face before returning to his mask of stony indifference. He looked down at the defense table. Marcus Cross stood there alone. He was a black man in his mid-30s, wearing a standard-issue bright orange Dossie jumpsuit that hung loosely on his athletic frame. His hair was cropped close to his skull, his face was clean-shaven, and his posture was remarkably straight, unusually so for someone who had spent the last 48 hours in a holding cell. He didn't have the defeated slouch of the chronic offenders, nor did he have the frantic darting eyes of the first-timers. He looked at the bench with a calm, analytical stillness that made Vance's stomach tighten with a sudden, instinctual dislike. Vance adjusted his glasses, peering down at the paperwork. Cross. Well, Mr. Cross, it says here you were picked up in Englewood on Sunday night. The charge is possession with intent to distribute fentanyl. The word fentanyl hung in the air of the courtroom like a poison gas. In the post-pandemic landscape of American jurisprudence, it was the ultimate dirty word. It was a word that stripped a defendant of any lingering sympathy from the gallery or the press. That is what the citation says, Your Honor, Marcus Cross replied. His voice was shocking. It wasn't the defensive mutter of the street level. It was deep, crisp, and bore the distinct, unhurried cadence of someone educated in the elite institutions of the East Coast. Vance sneered, his upper lip twitching in a way that Prosecutor Clayton Boyd recognized instantly. It was the tell. The judge had found his target for the day. You speak well for a man found sitting on a milk crate behind a liquor store with 12 glassine baggies of poison in his socks, Vance said, his voice dropping into a mocking, theatrical purr. Tell me, Mr. Cross, is that eloquent diction something you picked up before or after you decided to become a merchant of death in our neighborhood? Marcus did not blink. His hands, cuffed at the waist, remained perfectly still against his orange jumpsuit. I am not a merchant of death, Your Honor, and the items found in my possession were not narcotics. Oh, really? Vance let out a short, ugly bark of a laugh, looking over at the gallery to invite them into the joke. Clayton, what does the arresting officer's report say? Clayton Boyd stood up, smoothing the front of his Brooks Brothers blazer. Your Honor, on the evening of October 12th, Officer Garrett Logan of the Special Operations Section observed the defendant engaging in what appeared to be hand-to-hand transactions on the corner of 63rd and Halsted. Upon approaching, the defendant attempted to evade contact. Officer Logan detained him and discovered the illicit substances concealed on his person. A field test showed a presumptive positive for synthetic opioids. Vance turned his gaze back to Marcus. A presumptive positive, and yet you stand there in my court telling me the sky isn't blue. I see your type every single day, Mr. Cross. The arrogant ones. The ones who think because they can read a paragraph without stuttering, they can outsmart the police. You come into our cities, you poison our children, you turn our streets into war zones, and then you expect us to debate the finer points of procedure with you. A young public defender, a man named Russell, who had been assigned to the room for the week, stepped forward hesitantly. Your Honor, If I may enter an appearance for the record, my client maintains that there has been a severe chain of custody error, and we are requesting an independent laboratory validation of the field test. Mr. Cross has no prior felony record in the state of Illinois. I don't care if he has a note from the Pope, Mr. Russell. Vance slammed his hand down onto the mahogany bench with a crack that sounded like a pistol shot. Look at him. Look at his attitude. He's not remorseful. He's sitting there calculating how to beat the system. This city is drowning in synthetic poison, and it is drowning because judges before me were too soft, too frightened of being called unkind, to do what is necessary to clean the streets. The courtroom fell into an oppressive silence. The public defender shrank back slightly, knowing that to press further today meant ensuring his next 10 clients received the maximum possible sentences. Vance fixed Marcus with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. The kind of hatred that isn't born of sudden anger, but of decades of quiet, cultivated supremacy. "Mr. Cross," Vance said, his voice dropping into a low, venomous register that carried to the very back row of the gallery. "I don't like your face. I don't like your tone. I don't like your clothes, and I most certainly do not like you. You are a cancer on the tissue of this county, and I am the surgeon." What the terrified families in the gallery did not know, what the trembling young public defender did not suspect, was that Courtroom 402 was not operating on the laws found in the Illinois compiled statutes. It was operating on the shadow docket of a criminal syndicate that stretched from the marble hallways of the state capitol down to the gravel alleys of the South Side. Officer Garrett Logan was not just a decorated member of the Special Operations Section. He was Sterling Vance's personal collector. For 7 years, Logan had operated a highly sophisticated protection racket disguised as aggressive policing. He targeted independent narcotics dealers, arrested them on fabricated charges, and then gave them a choice: pay a weekly street tax to remain operational, or face Judge Vance's maximum sentencing guidelines. The money didn't stay with Logan. It was funneled through a series of shell companies, real estate holding firms registered in Delaware, that ultimately paid out consulting fees to Judge Vance's wife and brother. The operation was anchored on the street by a notorious West Side crime boss named Tommy C. Castillo, who used Vance's courtroom as a corporate cleaning service to eliminate his business competitors. To bring Officer Logan into court to testify on a simple possession case was an extraordinary measure, but Vance had insisted on it. He wanted to make an example of Marcus Cross. He wanted the neighborhood to see that no one, no matter how proud or clever, could survive in his city without bowing to the machine. The side door of the courtroom opened, and Officer Garrett Logan walked in. He was a thick-necked man with a florid, weathered complexion and hair shaved so close the pink skin of his scalp shone through under the fluorescent lights. His uniform was immaculate, the silver commendation bars on his chest gleaming. He walked with the heavy, proprietary swagger of a man who owned the building he was walking through. He stepped up to the witness stand, took the oath with a casual wave of his hand, and sat down, resting his thick forearms on the wooden railing. Clayton Boyd stepped forward to conduct the direct examination. "Officer Logan, please state your name and assignment for the record." "Garrett Logan, Cook County SOS, Sector 3. Do you recall the night of October 12th? "Yeah, loud and clear," Logan said, his voice a gravelly Chicago drawl. "Me and my partner were doing a proactive saturation patrol in Englewood. High crime area, lots of open-air drug sales. And did you have occasion to interact with the defendant, Marcus Cross?" Logan raised a thick finger and pointed directly at Marcus. "Yeah, that guy right there. We saw him loitering near the corner, Classic lookout behavior. When we pulled the squad car up over the curb, he made a sudden movement toward his waistband like he was discarding something. "That is a complete fabrication, Officer Logan," Marcus said. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a strange, resonant frequency that seemed to cut right through the acoustics of the room. "Silence!" Judge Vance roared, his face turning an alarming shade of crimson as he grabbed his gavel. "Mr. Cross, you will not open your mouth again in this courtroom unless you are spoken to. One more disruption, and I will have Bailiff Kowalski gag you and chain you to that chair. Do you understand me?" Marcus turned his head slowly, looking Vance directly in the eye. There was no fear in his gaze. Instead, there was something far more dangerous: pity. "I understand you perfectly, Judge Vance. Probably better than you think." Vance's hand whitened on the handle of his gavel. He wanted to order Mitch to strike the man right there. But the presence of a few scattered reporters in the back row held him back. He nodded toward the prosecutor. "Continue, Mr. Boyd." "Officer Logan," Boyd said, clearing his throat to break the tension. "Please describe the defendant's behavior during the detention." "He was verbally combative from the jump," Logan lied smoothly, leaning back in the stand. "Told us we didn't have probable cause. Said he knew his rights. When I went to perform a protective pat-down for weapons, he tensed up, threw an elbow, and tried to break away into the alley. My partner had to take him to the ground. He was actively resisting arrest, Your Honor. He was shouting street slogans, trying to get the crowd that was forming to interfere with the performance of our duties." "Resisting arrest?" Prosecutor Boyd feigned a look of deep, professional shock. "Officer Logan, why wasn't that charge included in the initial felony review filing?" Logan shrugged his massive shoulders, giving the judge a conspiratorial look. "Well, you know how it is. We try to be reasonable. The guy didn't actually manage to hurt my partner, and Judge Vance always tells us he wants to keep the docket moving, not clog up the system with minor misdemeanors if we've already got the felony weight. I thought I'd give the guy a break. Just hit him with the possession with intent and let the court handle the rest. Guess I was too nice. It was a masterful performance." In less than 3 minutes of perjury, Logan and Boyd had completely rewritten the narrative of the arrest. Marcus Cross was no longer just a citizen caught in a questionable search. He was an aggressive, police-hating drug trafficker who had been given a break by a benevolent officer, making his current defense seem like the height of ungrateful arrogance. "So," Judge Vance said, his voice dripping with an artificial, oily sympathy as he looked at Logan. "You and your partner were physically put at risk by this individual, and yet you showed him professional restraint." "We did our job, Your Honor," Logan said, smiling beneath his mustache. "Nothing more, nothing less." "I see." Vance turned his attention back to Marcus Cross. He steepled his long, manicured fingers beneath his chin, staring down at the orange jumpsuit with an expression of cold, absolute triumph. "You know, Mr. Cross, I find that my entire morning docket is full of these little misunderstandings. This city is quite literally drowning in them. It is drowning in the blood of young people killed by the poison you carry, and it is drowning in the excuses of men like you who think they can hide behind a fancy vocabulary." The gallery was dead silent. The young public defender stared down at his legal pad, his pen motionless. He knew the script. He knew that what was coming next was a 5-year minimum sentence disguised as a routine bond hearing. Vance leaned forward over the bench, his eyes boring into Marcus. "Mr. Cross, I am going to make sure you have a very long time to contemplate your attitude. I don't like your demeanor. I don't like your history, and I don't like you. Bond is denied. You will remain in maximum security custody until trial, and I suggest you use that time to find a lawyer who is better at begging than this one is." Marcus Cross did not move. He did not flinch. He did not look at the door, and he did not look at his public defender. Instead, he reached up with his cuffed hands and adjusted the collar of his orange jumpsuit. Then, he did something that no defendant in courtroom 402 had ever done before. He laughed. It wasn't a frantic laugh of madness, nor was it the bitter chuckle of a defeated man. It was a low, dry, authoritative sound that seemed to change the very atmospheric pressure in the room. "Bailiff!" Vance shouted, his face darkening. "Remove the defendant immediately." Big Mitch Kowalski stepped forward, his massive hand reaching for Marcus's shoulder. But Marcus didn't move away. He simply turned his head slightly and looked at the bailiff with a cold, absolute authority that made the veteran officer freeze mid-stride. "Mitch," Marcus said, his voice no longer carrying the submissive tone of a prisoner. "If you put your hands on me, you're going to be adding a federal charge of assaulting a federal officer to your current indictment. I suggest you stay right where you are." Kowalski blinked, his hand hovering in the air. He looked up at the judge, then over at Officer Logan. "What did you say?" Judge Vance slammed his gavel again, but the sound felt hollow this time. "Mr. Cross, you are in contempt of—" "My name is not Marcus Cross, Your Honor," the man in the orange jumpsuit said, his voice echoing off the wood panels with a terrifying clarity. He stood at his full height, his spine perfectly rigid, his shoulders back. The transformation was instantaneous. The illusion of the broken street-level defendant vanished, replaced by the unmistakable presence of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. "My name is Special Agent Kevin Grant," he said, looking Vance directly in the eye. "I am the director of the Public Corruption Task Force for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Chicago Field Office." A collective gasp went through the gallery. In the back row, two men who had been sitting quietly in trench coats stood up, reaching into their jackets. They didn't draw weapons. They drew gold shields on leather lanyards, hanging them around their necks. "What is the meaning of this theater?" Judge Vance stammered, his baritone cracking slightly, his face rapidly losing its color. "This is an Illinois state court. You have no standing here. Clayton, call security." Prosecutor Clayton Boyd didn't move. He had turned a translucent shade of gray. His eyes were fixed on the defense table, where Special Agent Kevin Grant was calmly pressing a small seam along the waist of his orange jumpsuit. With a small click, a tiny high-density digital transmitter slid out of the fabric into his palm. "For the last 14 months, Judge Vance," Agent Grant said, holding up the transmitter, "the United States Department of Justice has been conducting an investigation under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1962. Operation Gavel Down." Grant walked toward the bench, the chains of his handcuffs clinking. But he wasn't walking like a prisoner anymore. He walked like a prosecutor approaching a witness. Every single word spoken in this room today has been broadcast directly to a federal surveillance van parked 3 doors down on Halsted Street. Every insult you leveled at the citizens of this county, every piece of perjury Officer Logan just delivered on that stand, and every unwritten agreement you've made with Thomas Castillo has been recorded, time-stamped, and verified by federal warrants signed by Chief Judge Harrison of the Northern District of Illinois. Officer Garrett Logan's hand went instinctively toward his service weapon. "Don't do it, Garrett," Agent Grant said, without even turning around. "The building is surrounded. The state police have already secured the exits, and there are 20 tactical agents in the hallway right now. As if on cue, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom flew open with a resounding crash. A dozen men and women in tactical vests emblazoned with the letters FBI in bright yellow swept into the room, their weapons drawn but held at a professional low ready. The gallery erupted into chaotic murmurs and screams as people scrambled to get out of the way. "Sterling Vance," Agent Grant said, his voice rising above the din of the room like a bell of doom. "By the authority vested in me by the federal government, I am informing you that you are under arrest for federal bribery, honest services fraud, conspiracy to commit extortion under the Hobbs Act, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law." Vance sat paralyzed, his hand still holding the wooden gavel as if it could somehow protect him from the reality crashing through his doors. He looked down at his hands, then at the American flag behind him. The very system he had spent his life twisting into a personal weapon had turned its barrel directly toward him. Two federal agents marched up the steps of the dais. One of them, a stern-faced woman with her badge pinned to her belt, didn't hesitate. She reached across the mahogany bench, grabbed Vance's wrists, and brought them together behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of federal handcuffs filled the space where the sound of his gavel had so often ruled. "Mitch," Vance whispered, looking frantically at his bailiff. "Mitch, do something!" But Big Mitch Kowalski was already face down on the linoleum floor, his hands behind his head as two tactical agents secured him. Beside the witness stand, Officer Garrett Logan was being stripped of his service weapon and badge, his face an angry, purple mask of silent rage. Clayton Boyd, the ambitious young prosecutor, had sunk into his chair, his head in his hands, already calculating which of his colleagues he could betray to avoid a federal prison sentence. Agent Grant walked over to the public defender, who was standing beside his table with his mouth slightly open. Grant reached out his cuffed hands. "Mr. Russell, if you'd be so kind as to use that key the marshal just handed you to unlock these, I'd appreciate it. These Department of Corrections cuffs are murder on the wrists." The young lawyer nodded quickly, his hands shaking as he unlocked the federal agent's restraints. Grant rubbed his wrists, turned back to the bench, and looked at Sterling Vance as the disgraced judge was led down from his high seat. "You were right about one thing, Sterling," Agent Grant said softly, his voice carrying the immense weight of true justice. "This city is drowning, but today the water just reached your neck. The downfall of the Vance judicial dynasty was swift, clinical, and total. Within 48 hours of the raid on Courtroom 402, the federal grand jury returned a 74-count indictment detailing over $12 million in extorted funds, hundreds of falsified convictions, and a systematic campaign of racial targeting designed to populate private correctional facilities in the state. Sterling Vance did not receive the dignified, quiet exit his family name had enjoyed for generations. He was denied bail, the same right he had stripped from thousands of men before him, and was housed in a standard segregation unit at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Chicago. The silver helmet of hair was shaved. The custom tailor-made suits were replaced by the same orange cloth he had looked down upon with such profound disdain. When his trial concluded 6 months later, the jury took less than 3 hours to find him guilty on all counts. The sentence was 25 years without the possibility of parole, to be served at a federal facility in Florence, Colorado. This story, which played out across the front pages of every newspaper in the nation, carries a truth that goes far deeper than the mechanics of a federal sting operation. It is an emotional, visceral reminder of a law that cannot be found in any leather-bound volume of state code. The law of moral equilibrium. Never allow the acquisition of temporary authority or the comfort of your own social standing to blind you to the absolute, inherent worth of another human soul. The individual you choose to mock today, the person you dismiss because of the color of their skin, the neighborhood they come from, or the clothes they are forced to wear, may very well be the architect of your eventual undoing. Sterling Vance looked at Kevin Grant and saw only a stereotype. He saw an easy target, a man he could crush to satisfy his own vanity and maintain his grip on a corrupt empire. He never for a second imagined that beneath that orange uniform beat the heart of a federal officer, possessed of a moral courage and a quiet dignity that his own family line had never known. He forgot that true justice is not a weapon to be swung by the powerful. It is a mirror that eventually reflects the true nature of everyone who stands before it. Life has a way of constructing its own courtrooms. There will be moments in your life where you will find yourself standing before the judges of this world. People who will look down at you from their elevated benches of prejudice, arrogance, and unearned power. They will try to define you by your scars, your struggles, or your appearance. In those heavy, dark moments, I want you to remember the lessons of Operation Gavel Down. Hold your shoulders straight. Keep your eyes fixed on the truth. Do not allow their cruelty to force you into a posture of defeat. For the scales of this universe are patient, but they are absolutely relentless. True authority does not come from a wooden mallet or a custom-tailored robe. It comes from the quiet, unyielding commitment to what is right. And when the tables turn, and they always turn, the collapse of those who built their lives on injustice will be total, absolute, and breathtakingly precise. No one in this world is truly above the reach of the law, and more importantly, no one is ever truly beneath the warmth of its protection. Respect is not a transactional currency to be traded for favors. It is the absolute foundation of a civilized world. Never forget that the robe you think makes you untouchable might just be the shroud that buries your legacy. If this account of hidden strength, systemic accountability, and the ultimate triumph of human dignity moved you today, if it reminded you to look past the surface of those you meet and to never remain silent in the face of arrogance, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been dismissed or treated as less than by someone who thought they held all the cards, only to watch the universe balance the scales later on? Your experience, your voice, could be the exact source of hope that someone sitting in a dark room needs to hear right now. Leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Let's create a space dedicated to respect, fairness, and the recognition of human worth for every single person, regardless of their station. If you value deep, narrative-driven stories of accountability and the quiet power of truth, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next chronicle of human resilience. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your shared belief in a more just world. I will see you in the next story.